I'm so excited to be here. I hope all of you are also as excited as I am. We've got some amazing things that we've done over the last few days, and everyone is connected together in a whole new level. Today, we're going to start out with our keynote speaker. This is a man who has been both personally and professionally significantly impactful in my life. I'm so honored to be able to introduce him. Our keynote speaker for today is Dr. Dave Cornelius, aka Dr. Dave. He is a business executive, an Agile coach, partnering with leaders and teams in for-profit, startup, and nonprofit organizations to deliver a level of awesomeness that meets their goals. He works with Fortune 50 to Fortune 500 companies, helping them to deliver over $1 billion in customer value. Dr. Dave is a coach to university researchers to facilitate the commercialization of their startup ideas that can be brought to market. He is the CEO of nullshare.org, an on-demand Agile learning and development platform, and CEO of Immersion LLC, an artificial intelligence immersive learning company. Dr. Dave is a big community contributor and the founder of Agile for Humanity conference and meetup that supports the BIPOC community to have a voice in the product development and technology fields. He is the founder of the 5 Saturdays STEAM program that empowers underestimated high school students to pursue knowledge and careers in STEM fields. He is the author of 3 books. You will find his monthly podcast and blog, Nullshare with Dr. Dave, on popular streaming services, as well as nullshare.org. He is a husband, dad, and grandfather. Please welcome Dr. Dave Cornelius as he presents Generative Agile Leadership, Creating Space for People to Thrive.
Thank you. Can't wait to start this conversation. Let me start sharing my screen, and then we will get into our convo. So, right. Hopefully everyone could see what's being displayed. Just give me a thumbs up. Awesome. So we're going to talk about generative agile leadership today, creating space for people to thrive. And this is one of my favorite things, is how do we create space for people to thrive so that they could really bring value to the organization. And to me, it's all about helping people to achieve their level of awesomeness. And we use agility as a practice to do that, but it's also about innovation and also about bringing about change. I use the word generative as a context to talk about how do we give rebirth? How do we give new life to individuals that we're working with in our environment? So one of the things that I look at is the big challenge that we run into our world. One of the research says it's estimated that all of our teams, disengaged teams themselves, is about $550 billion in productivity loss per year. And in the grand scheme of things, of all the companies that we have out there, we may go like, oh, that's not a lot, but it's a lot. It's a lot for many companies because we're talking about lost revenue. We're talking about poor team performance and business failure. And so much of this challenge, this disengaged teams are really caused by what I call leaderless leaders, right? And what we're saying is like these individuals who are assigned in these leadership roles are the one who is like stealing the innovation energy from people. These are the people who are creating an environment where people are unable to deliver value for our customers. And this is a real thing. And I used the term leaderless leaders because I found that it was a way to speak about individuals who are not creating value, who are not enabling people to thrive in their space, right? And creating this great value for them. So here's some of the I call it the leaderless leader syndrome. And you can see that there's a bare tree, there's no fruits on that tree, right? And so that tree is barely alive in this image. So what we're talking about is that these individuals, they have unclear vision for where do we go. There's no empathy for the people that they're working with. And when they do any type of delegation to go get work done, there's no accountability in the process. Every time there's a failure, it's your fault. It's your fault. It's your fault. You're the reason why we failed. We're talking about poor execution and value delivery is the impact of these type of individuals. The novelty being crushed. We're talking about your new ideas are not really accepted, right? And so they have this thing, and for any of us who are coaches, we talk about limiting beliefs, but they also have a limiting mindset. And what we're talking about is that you will never be good enough. Your team will never succeed. We will never get to the next level. This is the mindset of a leaderless leader. They are not providing the environment and the space for us to thrive and do well in the organization. So I wanted to ask you is, what if we change our leadership strategy to really to begin to transform our business and think about a different type of leader, right? And sometimes you may think that this may be, this is too good to be true, right? So there is this leadership style that I put together, and I'm adopting it from Ron Westrum's organizational cultural model, right? And I'm saying in his writing about generative culture, he's saying generative culture is a high performance based organization. That's his premise. And I'm saying that yes, generative culture and leadership is the high performing based organization. I go one step further and I said, how about we're in a continual learning space as well? So here are the attributes, the values that a generative leader has, right? We're talking about high cooperation. So we're focusing on teams, we, us, the collective. When I say messengers, he used a different word in some of his definition about messengers killed, but I wouldn't use that. To me, that's a violent term. So I want to say messengers are enabled. So we trust you to achieve our goals. We're talking about risk that is shared. We're going to win and lose as a team. And we're on bridging, right? We're doing partnership. We're bringing people together, kind of like what we're doing in Agile for Humanity, right? We're bringing people together so we could partner and have conversations to learn more. When we fail, and we will fail, we want to inquire, what did we learn? We ran a little experiment with me playing around with this immersive view here here in Zoom. And we all had great feedback in terms of what's really going on with changing the view and how things are perceived to us. And we don't want to fail. But when we talk about novelty implemented, there's a statement that I make oftentimes when I'm working with teams. I say, run the experiment, evaluate the hypothesis. What did we learn from this? Every time we have a new idea, as long as we put a time box around that, we could essentially run an experiment and learn about this new idea that we have, because most of our new ideas are hypothesis. I think about the next thing that I've added, which is not part of Westrum's organizational culture, is the abundance mindset, that we have the ability and capacity to share with others. So when we look at this in a context, is that we want to change the way leadership presents itself to the organization. When I think about leadership, they gain earned influence. They just don't gain influence, it's earned. They have to work to get that influence. And they do that by modeling certain desired behaviors for other people to bring into their own lives, bring this as part of who they are. And so it's through their words, it's through their actions. They provide these patterns of expected behaviors, and those accumulation of those expected behaviors determine organization culture, whether it's good or bad. So I think about Simon Sinek, who wrote Start With Why, and also his book, The Leaders Eat Last. And here's a quote from what he says. He said, the leaders of companies set the tone and direction for the people. Hypocrites, liars, self-interested leaders create cultures filled with hypocrites, liars, and self-interested employees or people. The leaders of companies who tell the truth, in contrast, will create a culture of people who tell the truth. It is not rocket science. We follow the leader, and we see that every time. We see it in a country that's going on today. We follow some leader, and it's going to take us down a path, whether good or bad. So by modeling the right behaviors, leaders could really create a culture that is really generative, positive, performance-based, continual learning, culture that is required for us as lean agile practitioners to flourish. Those type of leaders, and we have them out there in our world today, right? Such leaders inspire us to follow direction and to incorporate these great leadership values into our own personal development journey, our own, that we could be focused on that we could feel that level of trust and to achieve the goals of the organization. That winning and losing is a team thing. It's not just I lose and you win, or I win and you lose. We win and lose together. It's cool. It's okay. We can have partnership with different people in our organization and have conversations to learn more about what's going on. If we fail, it's okay. What did we learn? What did we learn from that failure so we could get better? And if there's a new idea, don't just crush it. Run the experiment. Evaluate the hypothesis. Because every time we have a new idea, even yesterday when Dr. Mack was talking about an innovation is a hypothesis because we have zero validated learning behind that. So it's really important that we run the experiment and evaluate the hypothesis. Did it work? Can we make changes? Yes, we can. And have the abundance mindset. I use the word abundance because I'm thinking not only that we could grow, but we could share. Growth mindset oftentimes, like I could learn more. That's great. But can you learn more and share with others as well? That's the important aspect of this, of having this generative agile leadership values. So I've spoken a lot for the first several minutes of this presentation. So I am going to drop this Menti code, and I want you to evaluate your leaders, and we're going to see. It'll take about a minute or two. We'll figure out, and hopefully I could do this well. If not, we'll just boot on it. So I'm going to try it because guess what? We're going to experiment and see what we learn. So I'm going to drop this in our chat, and I want you to go to Menti, and see if you could get in and do an evaluation. So Savannah, since you're helping me out, why don't we have a quick, maybe 2 minutes. We'll try for 2 minutes and just maybe do one evaluation and before we move on. If you could set a timer. So if everyone could go up to the URL Menti and then enter this code and then answer the question. And so I'm going to go and see how things are progressing over here, if we're doing anything good or not. I'm going to stop sharing here and just share what we're looking at in Menti. So feel free to jump in and let's look at how are our leaders.
Quick question.
Yes.
Which leaders are we referring to?
Which leaders do you want it to refer to? Is it the leaders in your community, at your work, at your church? Which leaders do you want to talk about? When you think about those people that you're working with, how are they helping you to really thrive in your space? Are they creating that environment that allows you to feel that we're working as a team? Are you experiencing the blame game per se, as you're walking through life and you're doing your work? And it just doesn't have to be about your office space. It could also be about your community. It could be your political leaders that that we get to enjoy their stuff. All right. And then Savannah, you could just keep us honest with time, and then I'll save this results, and then I'll ask you another question.
All right, we are at 2 minutes. Time is up.
Okay, good. So as you can see, there's a wide spectrum, but you can see most of the people, when we talk about our experience with leaders who are participating, most of them are, it's almost we have two people on the fence, right? Who's just poo-pooing on their leaders. And then we almost have a 50-50 split, 4-6 almost, where, about 4 of you said, yeah, we agree. And we have a strong agreement that we have these generative agile leaders who are making stuff awesome in our space. And then we have about 6 people who said, like, no, we disagree. They do not provide that type of leadership in our space. So I'm going to download the results and so I'll share just so that we could have it so we could share it later. So I'm going to, okay, waiting. So let me go ahead and share another quick question and ask you about you. I'm a generative leader. I want to know, are you guys generative leaders in your space? Let's a similar question. Let's go back to Menti and Savannah do another 2 minutes. Let's figure out, are you a generative leader? Let's find out, more about you and what you're doing. Let's go back to my presentation and I'll share again. So interesting. Just see like how many people, am I a generative agile leader? 78% say they agree. Well, it's more like 89%, it's really on that side of the curve, that you guys are, and just give us 2 minutes. Someone just came into the room. Maybe we give them an opportunity, or maybe they, to vote as well. So let's make sure, Savannah, that we're running our time box and we're capturing everyone's response. So 9 people have responded, and I know the last time we had 12. Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid to be honest with yourself. Ah, 10. We went up 1 more. Let's see if we're going to get to 12. Ah, up to 11. See if we're going to get 1 more. And I'm twisting your arms. Come on. Come on. And Savannah, just keep us honest with time.
Got about 10 seconds left, Dr. Dave.
Okay, appreciate that. We made it to 12. I just wanted to have even numbers. So there we go. I'm going to download the results. Make sure we could have it to share back in the future, and we'll download it as a PDF. Okay. So in some ways, we could see that as we are going through, am I a generative leader, how we're judging ourselves and we're evaluating who we are, that we have more than 83% of you believe that you are a generative leader. And you know what? And that would not be an unlikely thing, because we're at an Agile conference. We're at a conference where we talk about agility and the way we think about the ways of working and how we think about people. So this is a different breed of individuals who are responding to this. And only 16% shows that, they're not a generative leader, which is good. Thank you for being honest. This is important, right? That we evaluate ourselves appropriately. So you would ask yourself, well, why do we care about this generative leadership stuff? Why is this important, right? I mean, when we have effective leaders that are demonstrating these values into the organization, whatever type of organization it is, right? I mean, we know it saves money. We know that team members, make sure, can everyone see my screen?
No, I'm not
Yeah?
seeing.
Okay, let me share again, because sometimes we lose this thing loses constitution. Okay, can you see the screen now?
Yeah, there it
Yeah?
is.
Okay, there you go. Just want to make sure that, and then, okay. So it's really important that we have leaders who demonstrate these values. When we get team members to be invested in the right outcomes, right, leaders could create an environment where people could be really super focused, right? Focus on the outcomes and the things that an organization really needs, its goals, right? So they could have more effectiveness in the process. We're in a time where we're talking about the great resignation, right? Where people are leaving their jobs in droves to do other things. Leaders who practice these values and these attributes, we're talking about lowering employee turnover. We're boosting employee performance, right? We're talking about generative agile leaders involve employees in major decisions and give them plenty of room to innovate and experiment. That's what we want. That's what we want. We want autonomy. We want purpose in the things that we're doing. This level of involvement, help all of these workers, these people to feel values and empower them to stick around, in the company for a long time. The leadership style, high cooperation, focus on we. It's really effective in really encouraging teamwork. When you're working in a space where you have great teamwork, where people are working together, sharing ideas, and it's not about just one person shining, that the shine is for the team. It's a totally different culture, totally different experience. When you apply generative agile leadership values, it really helps your company to outpace the competition, because we're talking about the challenge that we started out, $550 billion in productivity loss. Just imagine if we could wipe that away and put that as a side, right? The word generative and generative agile leaders, right? We're talking about giving birth to new organizations, right? And helping to create a certain type of behavior that allows the organization to achieve amazing outcomes. We've seen companies like that out there, and helping to wipe away that high $550 billion in loss. So in the chat, what I want you to do is to throw some companies out there that you think who have generative agile leaders, who are creating a high effective amount of productivity. Why don't you just go ahead and do that now in the chat? So we'll start with the very first attributes. When we talk about high cooperation, focus on we, what companies do you see out there that has high cooperation in their teams that you know of? It could be your company. Okay, someone says Target, Google. What criteria? Well, high cooperation, that's one criteria. And when we think about people working together. So Dr. Charles Collingwood, when we're talking about, even in your environment as teachers, as educators, let's talk, what does high cooperation look like for you? It's going to be different for everyone. HEB in Texas, okay. And so we could look at, where are you seeing, and what is this, let me ask you, what does this look like? When you talk about you experiencing trust to achieve the goals of the organization, what does that look like for you? What has that experience been? Even if you haven't had that experience, it's okay, right? You could say, I have never had the experience where where we've received trust to achieve the goals of our organization or our team. So you could even you could look at it from that angle as well. If you notice, they're playing rock, paper, scissors in this image, and it's there for a very specific reason, because if rock, paper, scissors is done well, you don't have any losers, right? I mean, we play this game, in rock, paper, scissors game in the Agile space, right? To show how we could, even though we're competing, we could still collaborate, and that's why this image is here. How about where risks are shared and we win and lose as a team? What does that feel like? What is that experience, right? As we're all running through the streets of Spain somewhere, and we have the bull ride, will we pick this guy up? Or will we just step over him and keep going in the process? And just put that in the chat, just start to express yourself in the chat as we're going through these different values, right? So risk assured is really important, that we're winning and losing as a team as we're going through the process. So this is one of my favorite, right? Where we're bridging is encouraged. It doesn't really matter what team you're on. So have you guys ever worked in an organization where you have this high competition between different teams and people aren't partnering and they're having conversations to learn? I've certainly had that experience. So if we could start to build those bridges because as we're going through navigating our business space, because we're in a VUCA world, right? We're in this volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous space, and it's been heightened with COVID, right? And we're all working remotely, we're all meeting remotely. So this becomes even more important. What is this like in your space when you have partnership and you're all working together to learn more from each other? Write those things down in your chat, because I want you to start to think through this as we're going through the whole process of what it's like to be a generative agile leader. And I'm just being mindful of our time. And then failure leads to inquiry. What did we learn? What did we learn when we last failed as an organization? How did that impact the people that you're working with? How did that impact your family? Because sometimes when we fail and we don't ask more, sometimes we take that stuff home, and we have terrible jokes like we kick the dog and stuff like that. We're taking that type of negative energy and emotion home with us. So what would happen if we start asking those questions early? What did we learn because we failed? Yes, failure is part of the process. Let's you ask the right question and focus on the right things. Yes. All right. And glad, yeah, wonderful, Savannah, that you brought up the idea about hackathons. I love those, right? I mean, that's a great way to evaluate a hypothesis, test it, get feedback, learn. Yep. So let's keep trucking. Novelty implemented. My favorite, run the experiment, evaluate the hypothesis. What did we learn, by going through and being able to try new things in the organization? Is it okay for us to use an AI to make some decisions in a very limited way, right? Evaluate the hypothesis. Now, to me, the abundance mindset is really critical, right? This is, if you notice that this is trying to create an environment of high cooperations where people are working together and sharing ideas. Have you ever worked in a place where people are hoarding information? People are hiding things from you? And even though they know that the information that they have, if they shared it with everyone, that the organization would flourish, that they don't have that capacity to share their knowledge with others. They don't have the capacity to share their winnings with others. So it's really hard when people don't have an abundance mindset or have a limiting mindset, that they can't see the opportunities for us to work well together, for us to bring greater value to our communities. So just think about that. What happens when you don't have the capacity to share with others? And you can throw that in the chat. What happens to you? What happens to your organization? Yeah, those who hoard the information and do not bring their team along for the drive will quickly find themselves as a team of one. Yes. And Chichi, you said you use this, was it you or Patrick used this African proverbs, right? If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together, right? This is part of that mindset. So I'm pulling some of those thoughts that you have shared with me in different conversations. Thank you so much for doing that. So what's next? I mean, one of the things that I've created as part of this whole new type of leadership style that I'm proposing, right? I have a hypothesis that if we use these 7 values, that we will have an opportunity to really build better teams, build better organization, build better experiences for people, but we could also measure it. So I've created a way to evaluate different individuals, and I've removed the names from this. This is actually people that I've actually measured, because I've run this program through several different people in a really large corporation, and you can see that some of the people, and this is just a self-evaluation, right? And we can see that everyone thinks that there are 5, but when it comes to encourage bridging, building things, it's almost like 0, right? And so if I see someone isn't encouraging bridging, I don't see how you could have high cooperation and how you could be shared risk, right? There's no way you could have an abundance mindset. There's no way none of this could be possible. And so we always start out first with, let's evaluate and measure where you are, self-evaluation. And we can do a 360 of this where we have the peers look at you. So you can see if this is the case, all of these things are false, right? Would you agree? If so, you could do it an emoji and reaction that this is the case, right? So this is an agile coach, no doubt, who feels this way. And I'm going like, oh my gosh, you answered these and then you don't bridge, you don't partner, right? So the other thing that we look at, that we start evaluating, is that also we looked at a few vice presidents, but this is just one vice president. And I think this person was being a bit more realistic, right? In terms of how they're working with their teams, the environment that they're building, that they're saying like, yeah, we don't have that much high cooperation. We try to make sure that our messengers are enabled, right? That we trust them to achieve their goal. We give them all of that opportunity. We're sharing risk. We're encouraging bridging. We're trying to learn as fast as we can, right? The novelty, we're trying to get to where we're asking questions, we're learning fast, right? Failure leads to inquiry. We're trying to experiment, and we don't have a perfect mindset, but at least this is a bit more honest of someone doing an evaluation. So as part of the program of the Generative Agile Leadership, we want to measure leaders up front, as a self-assessment. And then on the other side, when we see what's next, we measure them again on the other side to see exactly how are they perceiving themselves in self-assessment. And then we could also do this as a 360, where we go to their different peers, people that report to them, or even people that they report to, and start to evaluate them as a generative agile leader. So we ask ourselves, what's next? What's next in the process? This is a representation of a golden apple. Right? To me, this is the what's next. And so I'm telling you that, hey, I'm starting a generative agile leadership journey cohort for a limited number of people who may want to go through this. It's a 12-week workshop. And so when it's done, you'll be able to go through the process of identifying your current and future leadership style. Right? I mean, what are your strengths? What's your weakness? How do you develop these generative leadership capabilities where it's okay for you to take some risk and have high cooperation, to ask the question of failure lead to inquiry? How do you build the capabilities to survive and really thrive in a VUCA world, right? And building trusting relationships up, down, and across with your peers, right? These are the things that you would get out of this. You get to build with other generative leaders, right? And also build other future leaders as well for your organization, and you build this space of continual learning. We start talking about, if you're working at a corporation or any organization, how do we start aligning our strategies to how we execute? Be customer-centric and measure what matters. So this is a tool that I've developed based on Ron Westrom's model, and has expanded it in such a way that we can start to work and build a different generation, a different type of leadership, a different leadership style that's based on people and allowing them to be very successful. So I will leave some time for questions. If there are any questions or discussions that we want to have about the topic of a generative agile leader, right? I mean, this is a powerful tool that I've seen people come in and after having conversations with them through the practice, they're totally different. They begin to think differently, and they begin to approach how they add value to the organization. Questions?
I have a question or maybe a thought. So if you look at ADKAR, desire for D is one area where I've seen a lot of our leaders maybe are lacking desire to actually be a generative leader, because to do that, you have to put yourself aside and want the success of your team more than your own. So how do you manage working in an environment where the senior leaders lack the desire to be generative leaders?
So we have to recognize that we cannot make anyone adapt or follow any practice, right? We could only invite, and this is by invitation. And I've noticed that even through the cohorts that I've run, we invite 14, 15 people, and it starts out in that way. And then you see there's a weaning. People, 50%, 60%, or it's what's left. Other people decide to move along. It's really up to them. It's on them to recognize their ability to build an organization where people could thrive, right? It's their responsibility, and that's all you could express to them. And even though you provide the messaging, video, examples, illustration, it's really up to those individuals. So as a coach and a facilitator, it's really not my job to say, you must do. It's an invitation. Please join. This is good for your company. This will help your people be that, blah, blah, blah. It's up to those individuals to take on that responsibility. Matter of fact, it's part of their, if I'm working with people at a VP level, director level, or above, it's part of their fiduciary responsibility to make sure that their organization could thrive, right? That's why they get to pay the big bucks and and they get these wonderful bonuses, right? And all the recognition. Great question, Savannah.
Thank you. Yep, I like that answer. Apologies, my son stepped on a nail, so I'm like, woo.
So we have about 4 more minutes. If there are any other questions, let me know. We can answer them. I know someone wants to know where they can take the self-assessment. I could put it out there, and I'll just spin up since I have it in SurveyMonkey, I could just spin up one for this group and fire that off. So if there are any more questions before, go ahead.
Yeah, I actually do have a question. A lot of these qualities that are mentioned here, these are all excellent qualities. And I'm just kind of curious, as you were thinking about developing this, how you considered, or if you considered, the diverse nature and qualities of individuals who may have diverse backgrounds. Because I know a lot of times with leadership assessments, they don't necessarily take into consideration some of these kinds of qualities. And I'm just curious if that was if that was a part of your thought process in developing this.
Well, it most definitely was, right? Because I come from a diverse background. So definitely it's going to be centered in that. But more importantly, it's not just an assessment. The assessment is part of the whole cohort, right? To me, taking the assessment without going through the experience, to me, it's not valuable because it gives you a false sense of where you are, right? And so as we walk through 12 weeks of learning, what it's like to build trust in your organization, what it's like to enable self-organizing teams, what it's like to measure the things that are really important, that we're not using vanity metrics to think about our organization. So you have to go through that journey. And then so we may evaluate you up front, but if we just evaluate you up front without you going through the journey, I mean, there's no value to it. We have to look at both sides, right? What were you like before? Go through the journey. What are you like after, right? And then you could compare the two and go like, oh yeah. I've had people, who have gone through this journey say like, when I started this, I was just kind of like a performance manager type. I was hard on people. Now that I've gone through this process, I'm just thinking about this so differently. And I realized like how off I was in terms of how I dealt with people, how I built my teams. So you see, you can't just do it up front without the journey. You need both assessment, journey, assessment. It's a process. So it would work for anyone, man, woman, different ethnic backgrounds, doesn't matter.
Is there time for one more question?
Yes, it's time for one more question.
What would it look like for an organization to positively and negatively reinforce when there is or is not this behavior? So in other words, if a leader is behaving in a generative leadership way, how can we recognize that, promote that, and make it motivating for others to do the same, and then the opposite, right?
Yeah. So it depends on how people want to be recognized, right? Not everyone wants to be publicly recognized, but we could certainly begin to set up, since we could measure their behavior, right, over these 7 different attributes or values, we could start to give people more responsibilities. We could start to give people more visibility, right? Upward mobility. I mean, there's a lot of different ways we can do based on those different measurements after they've gone through the journey, right? We could certainly do that, right, as one way. I mean, and there could be other creative ideas. One thing I like to do is to leverage the wisdom of the crowd. Maybe it's not just my idea, but it's the idea of all the other leaders as well. Bring them together and said, what would it look like for us to recognize our leaders who are practicing these values well? That's one context. The other thing is, what about the people who report to those individuals? how should we reward those leaders who are practicing generative agile leadership? The third thing, peers, right? Because there's three different sides as we're working through this, is that the peers, are these people being generative agile leaders, right? You mean, are they bridging with us? Are we sharing risks together, right? And so that's the way I would model it in terms of working through the different layers in the relationships that live within the enterprise or within that organization, even that community, right? Because I've been in leadership programs with church leaders, and I hear some of the experiences, and you would think it would be different, but it's not. It's just like it is in corporate America. And I'm going like, wow, I was like really surprised by that. So just to let you know, just the different organizations that I've navigated. So.